I'm grateful to. Mr. Jacob Rees Mogg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliament is doing its correct duty, admittedly assisted by you, Mr. Speaker, in ensuring that there were 6 hours of debate yesterday and a further 3 hours of debate today. But these constitutional issues are not new. Indeed, it is at the heart of the Glorious Revolution, and one of the clauses of the Bill of Rights, which is still our law, is that the raising or keeping a standing army within the kingdom in time of peace, unless it be with the consent of Parliament, is against law. And that is why every 5 years an armed forces bill is passed to ensure that the armed forces that are available to the executive are approved by Parliament. This last happened in 2016 when the Armed Services Act was renewed. And on that occasion it passed its second reading without a division. It passed its third reading without a division. There was uniform consent within this House that the armed services should exist on a similar basis to that under which they have existed since 1689. The Leader of the Opposition did not choose to put down an amendment to put any limits on how the armed services could operate. He did not choose to put down an amendment to say that the government could not act without the specific consent of Parliament on every occasion. The bill was passed and it recognised the proper constitutional settlement and the separation of powers. An executive and a legislature are different things and have different responsibilities. I, as you know, have the highest respect for the Leader of the SNP within this House, the Right Honourable Gentleman for Ross, Skye and Lochaber. But I think he made an error in his speech when he thought that this House ought to give pre-approval, because the job of this House is to hold the executive to account, not to try and run the executive by remote control.
Thank the honourable gentleman very much. If it is the executive's idea to go to war or to engage in military action, shouldn't this House be holding the executive to account for its thoughts, ideas and policies?
The executive is being held to account today. The Prime Minister has spent 6 hours yesterday in this House being held to account and a further hour today. I give way to the honourable lady, my neighbour.
I am very grateful for the honourable member, my neighbour, that he gives way. Surely this debate isn't about a collective decision about the action that's been taken and taking, putting the armed forces at risk. It is about a process that we are collectively happy and agreed with in this House. And clearly, that we are having this debate today points to the fact that there isn't a collective agreement about the process.
The honourable lady is absolutely right, as the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was earlier, when he said today's debate is about process. And what I'm trying to say is that the process is established, has been established for centuries, and is highly effective, because the executive is only the executive as long as it commands the confidence of this House. It would have been open to the opposition, instead of going for an SO24 debate, to ask for a vote of confidence in Her Majesty's government. And I think that would have been the right thing to do, having listened carefully to the Leader of the Opposition's speech, because the opposition fundamentally does not have confidence, or its leadership does not, to have made this decision. And then we would have seen whether this House had confidence in the executive to make the decisions that are the legitimate business of the executive. I won't give way again, because time is short. And if that were to happen, then we would know that the use of force had not been agreed by this House, but it is a retrospective agreement, and it is established in our Constitution and has been for the longest series of years. And that's very important, because an executive has the confidential information that allows it to make the decisions. The Leader of the SNP in this House said, why was the Cabinet called when Parliament wasn't? Well, the obvious reason that the Cabinet was called is that we have Cabinet government in this country. The Prime Minister cannot act on her own. The Prime Minister has to act with the consent of the Cabinet. That is how our constitutional functions. Of course, I'll give way to the right honourable gentleman.
I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman. We will not concede that in any military action since the Iraq War, consent of Parliament has been sought on every occasion before troops have been engaged.
This is not correct. The bombing raids on Libya, retrospective consent was given by this House. It was not sought in advance. And that is the issue that goes to the heart of this matter. That yes, we have a flexible constitution, but it is not right to say we have no constitution. The flexible constitution allows a government to come to this House when it is considering certain types of action, where no secret information needs to be given out, where there may be a long-term plan for an invasion or whatever it is. But it also allows the government the flexibility to act when times are urgent and business is pressing and the information is of the greatest sensitivity. And that was why I was making the point that it was right and inevitable that the Cabinet had to be consulted, because that is where power rests, but absurd to propose that the House of Commons could give its consent, because in fact the only way the House of Commons can consent is by legislation. And then we would need to go to the other end of the palace and ask their lordships as well. And by the time you've passed a law saying that we can engage in conflict, the whole conflict's over. And the issue here is that the Armed Forces Bill already covers it, and that bill was passed unanimously. This House gives confidence in the government and controls supply. The armed forces cannot go to war, not only if the Armed Forces Bill hasn't been passed, but if supply is not voted to allow the Army, the Navy and the Air Force to go about its business. That is where we have control every year on the actions of our military. So we have it quinquennially, we have it annually, we have confidence or not in the government. This is our correct, our established constitutional situation. There are ways for the opposition to deal with a government that it does not approve of, and that is by a vote of confidence. That it has not chosen to go down this route actually shows that the opposition is of a pacifist tone, and that may be honourable and it may be noble, but it is different from upsetting our constitution merely to entrench inaction.